He laughed. Right in front of everyone. My son, my own flesh and blood, burst out laughing when they brought out my retirement cake. Took you long enough, old man, he smirked, and the room chuckled with him. My co-workers looked at me, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. I just stared at the cake, vanilla with blue icing that said, "Congratulations, Frank. 40 years in that factory." My knees shot, my back ruined. And this was my send-off? A joke? I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. But that night, something in me cracked, and it never healed. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. They weren't always like this, my son, the laughter, the coldness. There was a time when he'd run into my arms the moment I walked through the door, smelling like grease and steel and sweat. He used to say I was his hero. That was before the silence, before the sarcasm. I raised Mark alone after his mother, Marjorie, passed. I still remember the night she didn't wake up. A quiet heart attack, they said. Peaceful. That word haunted me for years. She left me with a 5-year-old who cried every night for the first 6 months. I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew one thing, I had to show up for him. Every day, I woke up at 4:30 a.m., worked the first shift at the mill, came home, cooked dinner, helped with homework, cleaned up, and collapsed into bed. I didn't have time for grief, not then. My whole life was keeping the lights on and giving Mark a boyhood that didn't feel empty. He loved baseball. I remember saving up for a whole year to buy him a mitt he saw in a catalog. I used to hide coins under the floorboard of our bedroom closet like it was some kind of treasure chest. The day I handed him that glove, his eyes lit up like I'd handed him the world. He used to call it magic leather. We didn't have much, but we had rituals. Pancakes every Sunday. We'd go down to the local flea market, just the two of us. I'd give him $5 and let him pick out whatever junk he wanted. Sometimes it was a scratched-up comic book, other times a toy soldier missing an arm. He always said it was the best part of the week. As he got older, I took on more overtime to save for college. I wanted him to have choices. He was smart, way smarter than me. First in his class by 8th grade, teachers calling home with nothing but praise. I remember thinking, he's gonna make it out of here. He's gonna have a better life. That thought kept me going, especially on the nights I couldn't feel my fingers from the cold or when the machine screamed so loud my ears would ring through dinner. High school came, and so did the distance. He stopped sitting at the table with me. Dinner was eaten in his room, doors closed, headphones on. I thought maybe it was just a phase. Teenagers, right? But sometimes he looked at me like I was a worn-out tool, something he'd outgrown. Still, I pushed through. When he got into college, I cried. He didn't see it, I waited until he left for orientation. I gave him every dollar I had. Even took a small loan against the house, our house, to help with tuition. I never told him. I didn't want him to carry that burden. I just wanted to give him everything I never had. When he graduated, he didn't come back home right away. Said the city was where the real jobs were. I understood. But when he finally did move back, with a shiny car, a new job title, and a fiancée who barely looked me in the eye, things weren't the same. Still, I gave him the land. That house he lives in? I gave him the land it stands on as a wedding gift. It had been in our family for years. My father cleared that land by hand. I thought, maybe this will make him feel rooted again. Maybe he'll remember who we are. I even helped with construction. Came by on weekends with my aching joints, holding lumber, painting walls, bringing coffee for the workers. I remember one day, the contractor handed me a hammer, and Mark just laughed and said, "Careful, Dad. We don't want you breaking a hip." The guys laughed with him. I smiled, but something stung. Marjorie would have never let that fly. She had a way of bringing warmth into a room, of making Mark see the heart in things. Sometimes I wonder if she'd still be alive, would he be different? There were good years. I'll never erase them. But looking back now, I think those years meant more to me than they did to him. I held on to those memories like currency. He seemed to spend them like loose change. I still have the photo of us fishing when he was 7, his toothy grin, me in that ridiculous floppy hat Marjorie hated. It sits on my nightstand. Most nights, I look at it before I turn off the light, asking myself, when did he change? Or, did he always know how to smile while pulling away? Because now, every smile comes with a joke at my expense. Every visit feels like an obligation. And that laugh, the one at my retirement party, didn't come from a place of joy. It came from somewhere cold. And I can't unhear it. I used to tell myself I was imagining it, the way Mark started correcting me in front of people, the way his wife, Lydia, flinched when I offered advice or touched something in their kitchen. "Don't worry, Frank," she'd say with a tight smile, "we've got it covered." It always sounded polite on the surface. But underneath, it felt like a gentle push out the door. The changes were slow. Like rust on a fence, you don't see it at first, just feel the give when you lean on it. The first real shift came that Thanksgiving, 2 years before the cake. They'd offered to host. I was touched. I thought maybe it was their way of bringing me into their world. When I arrived, I brought Marjorie's old casserole dish. Her green bean bake was legendary, Mark used to beg for it every year. When I walked in, Lydia took the dish from my hands and whispered, "We actually already made one." She placed it on the sideboard like a forgotten jacket. Mark didn't even look up from his phone. Dinner was stiff. They sat me at the end of the table next to their dog's crate. When I tried to make a toast, Lydia cut in to play a playlist from her phone. Some trendy jazz cover of pop songs. Nobody noticed I never got to speak. After that, the invitations came with caveats. "Just a quick dinner, Dad. Don't worry about bringing anything. Hey, we're actually keeping it just friends this year, hope you understand. Oh, it's Lydia's family this Christmas, maybe next time." I kept telling myself it was normal. Kids grow up, start their own lives, have their own traditions. But it wasn't just absence, it was erasure. Every visit felt like a performance. A pat on the head. A "good to see you, old man," followed by disappearing into another room. There was one afternoon, a small moment, but it still gets to me. I had dropped by to deliver some tools Mark had asked for. They were remodeling the upstairs bathroom. I knocked and waited on the porch. Heard voices inside. "Lydia, why is he always here? He doesn't even call first. Mark, he gets bored. He doesn't have anyone else. Lydia, well, we're not his entertainment committee." Then the door opened. Their expressions flipped like a switch. "Hey, Dad." Mark grinned. "Just talking about you." They never knew I heard them. After that, I stopped dropping by. I waited to be invited, and the invites slowed to a crawl. When they did come, I noticed something else. Mark started making odd comments about my house. "This place is really too big for you, don't you think? You could sell it and move into a nice condo, something easier to manage." Lydia would chime in, "There's a beautiful assisted living place near us. It even has a garden." I'd laugh it off, say, "I'm fine where I am," and change the subject. But their eyes never changed. They weren't joking. They were testing the water. That was when I really started to notice the power shift. Not just in conversation, but in posture. Mark no longer asked for my advice, he gave me instructions. He called me, "sir," in a way that wasn't respectful. It was dismissive. Like talking to a waiter. I tried to stay patient. I chalked it up to stress. Their jobs were demanding, they were newly married. Maybe they were figuring things out. I told myself not to be sensitive. But then came the birthday. My 70th. I didn't want a party. I just wanted a quiet dinner with my son. I made a roast, Marjorie's recipe. Set the table with the good dishes, even opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for years. Mark showed up 40 minutes late. Alone. Said Lydia had a migraine. He spent most of the meal texting. When I asked if he liked the roast, he said, "It's a bit dry, Dad." That was it. I offered him a slice of pie. "No thanks. Lydia doesn't let me eat sugar." He stood before I'd even finished my plate. "Got an early meeting. You understand." He didn't even take the leftovers. He used to beg for them when he was a kid. After he left, I sat there in the quiet, fork still in my hand, wine glass half full. The food on the table looked like it was meant for someone else. Someone who never arrived. That night, I walked into the garage and looked around. All the tools. The shelves I built. The old lawnmower we fixed together when he was 12. I ran my hand along the workbench and whispered, "Where did you go, son?" But there was no answer. Just the slow hum of the old fridge. In the days after, I started noticing how often Mark referred to the house in casual conversation. "When you decide to downsize. After you're done with it. You know, that lot is worth a good amount now." Always framed as hypothetical. But his tone, it was like he was already picturing it. That house meant everything to me. It wasn't big, but every floorboard, every creak had a story. Marjorie painted those walls. We marked Mark's height in the doorframe of the pantry. There was a crack in the bathroom tile we never fixed because it looked like a heart. I couldn't just leave that behind. But to him, it was real estate. I started to feel like I was living on borrowed time in my own home. It wasn't just his words. It was the way he looked around when he visited. Like he was appraising. Evaluating. Dreaming. And all I could do was watch. It was a Sunday. I remember because I always used to make a pot roast on Sundays, even if it was just for me. The smell of it reminded me of Marjorie, humming in the kitchen, wiping her hands on the apron she refused to replace even when it tore. The ritual brought comfort. But that day, it brought something else. Mark called that morning. "We're stopping by later," he said, casual as ever. "Nothing big, just want to chat." When they arrived, I noticed Lydia had a manila folder tucked under her arm. Mark didn't greet me with a hug, just a nod. They didn't sit down either, just stood near the dining table like they were on a tight schedule. "We've been talking," Mark began, "and we think it might be time to start thinking long-term. You know, about your care, the house, and all that." Lydia opened the folder and slid a few papers toward me. "This is just preliminary," she said quickly. "It's a draft of a trust. We were thinking we could set it up so everything is ready in case anything happens." I looked at the paper. My name was there. So was Mark's. It gave him control over the property, immediate control. "You'd still live here, of course," he added. "But it's just easier to plan ahead, Dad. Saves everyone trouble later." I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, really looked. And I saw it. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't worried or reluctant. He was excited. He was already picturing it, the walls painted over, the furniture replaced, my garden dug up for a patio. My life, erased room by room. "Why the rush?" I asked. "It's not a rush," Lydia said. "It's proactive." "And who's the everyone it saves trouble for?" I asked, looking at Mark. He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "Dad, come on. You're not getting any younger. That was the moment. The moment it turned. I wasn't a father to him anymore, not a man who raised him, fed him, stood beside him at his mother's grave. I was a placeholder. A temporary occupant in a house he already considered his. I pushed the papers back. "I'll think about it," I said quietly. They didn't argue. They just exchanged a glance, the kind couples share when they've already won the discussion before it even starts. "Let us know," Lydia said, already gathering her things. That night, I sat in the chair by the window, Marjorie's chair. I used to joke that it still smelled like her lavender perfume. Now, it just smelled like dust and time. The roast was untouched on the table. I watched as the sun slipped behind the trees, the light bending through the glass just right, making everything golden for a moment. I remembered Mark at 10, racing through the backyard in a cape we made out of a towel. "I'm gonna fly, Dad," he shouted. And I told him, "You already do." When did that boy disappear? The next day, I went over to Mark's place unannounced, something I hadn't done in months. They were hosting a small gathering, just friends, from the looks of it. People I didn't recognize. I knocked, and after a minute, Lydia opened the door. "Oh," she said, her smile faltering. "You didn't call." "I won't stay long," I replied. "Just came to return that wrench Mark borrowed." She hesitated, then opened the door wider. Inside, the house was full of laughter. Mark was at the kitchen island, drink in hand, talking animatedly. When he saw me, something flickered in his eyes, not joy. Not surprise. Discomfort. "Hey, Dad. We're kinda in the middle of something." I handed him the wrench. "Thought you might need this." He didn't take it right away. Just looked past me toward the door. Then one of his friends, a guy in a blazer and no socks, asked, "Is this the house you said you're inheriting soon?" The room froze. Lydia let out a sharp laugh. "Not quite yet." Mark tried to smooth it over. "Guys, come on." But it was too late. I just nodded. "So that's how you talk about it now." Mark stepped toward me, lowering his voice. "Dad, don't make this weird." I looked around at their perfect countertops, their designer light fixtures. The house I gave them the land for. The one I helped paint. And I saw it, not a home, but a symbol of success. Something to show off. "You'll get it over my dead body," I said softly. And not a day sooner. Then I turned and walked out. They didn't follow me. They didn't call after me. They didn't even close the door. They just went back to laughing. The next day, I visited Marjorie's grave. I knelt in the grass and whispered, "You'd have known what to say. I wish you'd been here to see what he's become. Or maybe, to stop what I didn't." As the wind stirred the leaves around me, I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger. Not sadness. Something colder. Sharper. Resolve. The hardest part wasn't what they said to my face. It was what they said when they thought I wasn't listening. A few weeks after that gathering, I stopped answering Mark's texts. They were sparse anyway, mostly reminders about doctor appointments or checking in to maintain appearances. I needed space. Time to breathe. But it didn't take long before he showed up at the house. He knocked like a stranger. When I opened the door, he stood there in a crisp button-down shirt, hands stuffed awkwardly in his pockets. "You haven't answered me in a while," he said. "I know," I replied. "Come in if you want." We sat in the living room, the silence between us louder than any argument. He didn't comment on the dusty furniture or the fading wallpaper. That's how I knew he wasn't here to reconnect. He had a purpose. "I talked to a guy," he began. "A financial planner. He said if we transfer ownership now, it'll save taxes down the line. I didn't respond. He said you could even set it up as a life estate. You'd still live here, Dad. But it protects the property, for the future. The future. That was the word he kept hiding behind, like it made everything sound responsible and thoughtful. But I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't thinking about my future. He was thinking about his. I'm not ready to sign anything, I said. He sighed, long, theatrical. You're being difficult. Maybe, I replied. Or maybe I've just started paying attention. He didn't stay long after that. 2 nights later, I picked up the phone by instinct when it rang, not checking the caller ID. It was Lydia. But she must have thought she was leaving a voicemail. He's being stubborn. I told Mark we might need to get the attorney involved. If we don't push now, we're gonna lose the window. He's old, but not stupid. I stood there, frozen. She was talking about me like I was a legal obstacle. Not a father. Not a man. Just a piece of paperwork standing in their way. I hung up before the message ended. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Marjorie used to sit with her crossword puzzle and a cup of tea. I kept hearing Lydia's voice echo in my mind. We might need to get the attorney involved. Was that what I'd become to them? An inconvenience? I got up, walked into the hallway, and stared at the framed photo of our wedding day. Marjorie in her simple dress, me in that oversized suit. We were poor but certain. And now, the only thing certain was that the people I loved most had already made plans, ones that didn't include me. The next morning, I pulled out the old box from under my bed. It held all my important papers, the deed, my will, bank statements, insurance. Everything I'd ever protected. I realized then that the only people who had ever truly cared about that box were gone. Marjorie. My brother Tom, before the cancer took him. Everyone else just wanted what was inside it. Later that week, I went into town for groceries and ran into Helen, the widow who lives 2 doors down. We chatted a bit, pleasantries, but then she looked at me carefully. You all right, Frank? You look tired. I wanted to lie. But something in her voice broke me open. My son, I said, he's trying to take the house before I'm even gone. She was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Mine tried to move me into a home last year. Said it was for my safety. Turns out he just wanted to flip my place for profit. I stared at her, stunned. You're not alone, she said softly. Don't let them rush you. It was a strange kind of comfort. Painful, but shared. That night, I sat in the living room and thought about the things I'd ignored, the way Lydia always asked questions about the house's value. The random visits that always included opening cabinets, peeking into the attic. The comment from Mark months ago, when we remodel this place, we could add a whole sunroom. We. He always said we when he meant after you're gone. I started to notice how rehearsed they were when they spoke to me. Like they were reading from a script. The smiles didn't reach their eyes. The questions weren't really questions, they were probes. Measurements. I began writing things down. Notes on our conversations. Dates, times. Not for revenge, not yet. Just for clarity. Just to remind myself I wasn't going crazy. And then came the worst of it. I found the letter in my mailbox. No return address. A local law firm. Inside, a draft petition for guardianship. They hadn't filed it. But it was written, my name filled in, signatures blank. They were planning to declare me legally unfit. Take control of everything. That was the moment my sadness turned into something else. Resolve. I lit the fireplace that night, not for warmth, it was still summer. But I needed to hear the crackle. I needed to remember I was still alive, still in charge of my own story. I looked around the room, the faded curtains, the dusty shelves, the old quilt Marjorie made. All of it, they saw as clutter. I saw it as my life. They thought they were clever. Thought they'd win by smiling while they stole. But they forgot something. I built this life. And I wasn't about to let them tear it down just because I got old. Speech balloon. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. I didn't sleep much after that letter. It sat on the kitchen table for days, untouched, unopened again, like if I avoided it long enough, maybe it would vanish, maybe they'd vanish. But the damage was done. It was real. My son and his wife had drawn the line, and they weren't waiting for me to cross it, they were planning to drag me. I decided to give Mark one last chance to explain. Maybe there was something I missed, some part of this I'd misunderstood. Maybe Lydia was pushing him, and he didn't know how to stop it. I called and asked him to meet for coffee. Neutral ground. A small cafe near the park where I used to take him to feed ducks. He arrived 10 minutes late, checking his phone as he walked in, not even looking up when he sat across from me. "So," he said, "what's going on?" I pulled the letter from my coat pocket and slid it across the table. He glanced at it, sighed. "You weren't supposed to see that yet." That sentence. Not, "That's not what you think." Not, "I'm sorry." Just regret that I'd found it too early. "You were going to have me declared incompetent," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You and Lydia." He shrugged. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Mark? Help me understand why my son is trying to steal my life out from under me." "Dad," he said, leaning forward, his tone shifting to that condescending calm I'd grown to hate, "you're 70. You live alone. You forget things. You don't have a support system. We were just trying to help you before things got out of hand." I stared at him. "You call that help?" He looked around, like someone might overhear. Then he said, "You're being dramatic. It's not like we were going to throw you out." "No?" I asked. "Then why did Lydia already talk to a realtor?" His jaw tensed. That was it, the slip. He didn't deny it. Just muttered, "You're impossible sometimes." I took a deep breath. I didn't want to cause a scene. I wanted to walk out with my dignity intact. "I may be old, Mark," I said quietly, "but I'm not blind. And I'm not weak." He said nothing. I stood, buttoned my coat, and left the cafe without looking back. That night, something shifted in me. The sorrow, the confusion, the guilt, they hardened into something else. Steel. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to make sure they never did this to anyone else. The next day, I called Ed Caraway, an old friend from the factory, now retired and working part-time for a local lawyer. He picked up on the first ring. "Frank," he said. "Been too long. I need a favor," I told him. Within 2 days, I was sitting in a quiet office, wood-paneled walls and the faint smell of leather-bound books. The lawyer, Dana, listened to everything. I brought the letter, the notes, the timeline of visits and conversations. She didn't interrupt, just let me lay it all out like I was unpacking a burden I'd carried too long. When I was finished, she said, "We can protect you. But it'll mean cutting them out. Completely." I hesitated. Not because I wasn't sure, but because even after all of it, part of me still remembered the little boy in the cape, the green bean casserole smiles, the sound of tiny feet running through the halls yelling, "Daddy." But that boy was gone. And the man who replaced him didn't deserve a damn thing. "I want to change the will," I said. "I want to make sure if he contests it, he gets nothing." Dana nodded. "We'll add a no contest clause. And we'll notarize it 6 ways from Sunday." That night, I walked home lighter than I had in weeks. The papers weren't signed yet, but my heart had made peace with the choice. I spent the next few days quietly getting things in order. I updated the deed, put utilities in my name only, closed the shared savings account Mark had access to. Everything he had a finger in, I sealed shut. I didn't tell anyone. But the changes didn't go unnoticed. Helen stopped by again, dropping off a jar of strawberry jam she'd made. "Saw some folks peeking around your backyard," she said casually. "Who?" I asked. "Some couple. Young. Realtor types. Left quick when I stepped outside." I nodded. "Thanks for letting me know." They were circling like vultures now. Looking at my life like it was a future asset, a footnote on someone else's dream board. But this wasn't just a house. It was mine. My home. My memories. My pain. My peace. They weren't going to get it. Not now. Not ever. As I stood at the window that evening, watching the light dim over the hill, I felt Marjorie's presence more clearly than I had in years. I whispered, "I'm going to fix this. For both of us." And I meant it. The pen in my hand felt heavier than it should have. Maybe it was the weight of what it meant, the quiet finality of it. I'd never expected to be sitting in a lawyer's office, signing away my legacy. Not like this. Not because of my own son. Dana slid the papers in front of me with a steady hand. "We'll go through each section together," she said. Her voice was gentle, but firm, the voice of someone who had seen families destroy each other over less than this. "This is the updated will," she continued, tapping the first page. "It names your primary beneficiary, the Veterans Trust you selected." I nodded. I'd spent the week researching. The organization ran a series of transitional homes for older veterans, men like me, some worse off. I liked that. The idea that my house could be more than a bargaining chip for Mark, that it could be a haven for men who'd earned it. "We've included the no contest clause here," Dana said, sliding another page forward. "If Mark or Lydia attempt to challenge the will, the entire estate will default to the state. They'd get nothing." I swallowed. That line alone might have been the heaviest of all. She must have seen it in my face. "It's strong, Frank. It holds up. But it's not easy to write your children out. Even when they deserve it." "No," I said quietly, "it's not." She placed the final document in front of me. "This one's optional. A letter. You don't have to include one, but if you'd like to say something to your son, an explanation, or not, we can add it to the record." I stared at the blank page for a long time. I thought about all the things I wanted to say. How I carried him through the flu when he was 5. How I worked 16-hour shifts to keep him fed, warm, and dreaming. How I kissed his mother's photo every night so he wouldn't see me cry. And how none of it, meant anything to the man he became. In the end, I didn't write much. Just one sentence. "You traded your father for a house, and lost both." I folded the letter and handed it back to Dana. The rest of the process was quiet. Signatures. Initials. A notary who barely looked up. The kind of cold professionalism I used to mistake for safety. But somehow, sitting in that chair, I felt more secure than I had in months. When it was over, Dana said, "Would you like me to keep a copy on file?" "No," I replied. "I want one in my safe. And one in the old gun cabinet, upstairs. Just in case someone gets clever." She smiled faintly. "You're smarter than most, Frank." I didn't feel smart. I felt empty. But also relieved. On the way home, I walked instead of driving. I passed the bakery where Marjorie used to buy cinnamon rolls every Saturday. The window was fogged up, like it always was in cooler weather. I could almost hear her voice, teasing me about sneaking a second one before lunch. I stopped by the florist, bought a small bouquet of white carnations, and took them to her grave. "I did it," I whispered. "He doesn't get the house. He doesn't get you." The breeze picked up slightly, brushing the petals against my knuckles. "I'm sorry," I said. "For letting it get this far. For raising someone who forgot how to love." I didn't cry. Not that time. I just stood there until the sun began to dip behind the trees. When I got home, I opened the drawer of the side table by the front door. Inside were the old house keys, Mark's copy. I'd found them in the drawer last week after he'd returned them without a word. That simple gesture, unceremonious and cold, had said it all. He'd given up pretending. And now, so had I. I took the keys, wrapped them in a small handkerchief, Marjorie's, and tucked them into a metal box along with the will, the property deed, and the letter. Then I locked the box and placed it in the attic. The attic that Mark hadn't climbed into since he was 13, when he dropped a flashlight through the floorboards and blamed it on the dog. I smiled to myself. A sad smile. But real. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in weeks. Not because the pain had gone away, but because I finally had something they couldn't take. Control. I didn't know what would come next. Whether Mark would find out, or when. Whether there'd be a confrontation, a fight, a lawsuit. But I knew this much. The man who mocked my retirement, who treated my life like a waiting room, he was no longer the heir to my love or my labor. He didn't deserve either. It was just past noon when he showed up again, Mark, standing on my porch with a folder in one hand and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. Not since the coffee shop, not since the will was changed. I thought maybe he'd finally backed off. That maybe, just maybe, some part of him had realized he'd gone too far. But now, here he was, like none of that had ever happened. "Hey, Dad," he said, too cheerfully. "Got a minute?" I didn't invite him in. He stood there awkwardly, glancing around like someone might be watching. "It's just a quick thing. Some paperwork Lydia and I drew up. Totally optional, of course." He said that word, optional, like a salesman offering a free trial. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. He opened the folder and pulled out a document. "We figured we could simplify some things. You know, in case something ever happens. This just gives us limited access to manage the property. Taxes, utilities, upkeep stuff. Saves you the hassle." I took the document and scanned it. It wasn't limited anything. It was a quiet handover. The kind lawyers call durable control. It would have given him access to sell, lease, transfer, anything he wanted, and I'd be powerless to stop it. "You want me to sign this?" I asked, staring at him. He nodded. "It's just easier this way. You don't have to worry about all the red tape when the time comes." I handed it back to him. "No," I said. "Not now. Not ever." He looked thrown off, but only for a second. "Dad, come on. You think I'm an idiot?" I snapped, the anger finally rising. "You really thought you'd just show up and I'd sign my life away? Again?" Mark's voice hardened. "You're being paranoid. Lydia and I are just trying to make sure things don't get messy later. No one's taking anything." "No," I said again. "You're just waiting for me to die so you can repaint the walls and list the house." His jaw clenched. "That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, bitterly. "What's fair is that I worked for 40 years so you could grow up in this home. What's fair is that I gave you land for your wedding gift and helped build that house you live in. What's not fair is you treating me like I'm a burden you're trying to manage into a corner." Mark didn't respond. He didn't need to. I could see it in his eyes. There was no guilt. No regret. Only frustration. That I hadn't made this easier for him. "I'll tell you what," I said, stepping closer. "You and Lydia don't have to worry anymore. It's all handled. You'll never have to lift a finger over this place again." He blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, keeping my voice steady, "that everything you were waiting for, it's gone. The house, the savings, the land. All of it. And if you try to fight it, you'll walk away with nothing. Less than nothing." He stared at me like I'd slapped him. "I'm your son," he said softly, like that was supposed to mean something. I nodded. "You were." He stepped back, folder limp in his hand. "This is a mistake," he muttered. "You'll regret this." "No," I said, turning back toward the door. "What I regret is thinking you loved me for who I was, not what I owned." Then I closed the door behind me. I stood in the hallway for a long time, breathing hard. My heart was pounding, my hands were shaking. But it wasn't fear. It was relief. A quiet kind, like air after a storm. That night, I took out the box again, the one with the will, the letter, the documents that made it all final. I added one more thing, a small note, handwritten, addressed simply, "To whom it may concern." It detailed everything, the visit, the document, the confrontation. Just in case. I wasn't just fighting to protect myself anymore. I was protecting the right to be remembered on my own terms. The next morning, I called Dana. "It's done," I told her. "He made his move." "I'll be ready," she said. "If he tries anything, you won't be alone." Later that day, I packed a small bag. Not because I was running, but because I was preparing. I gathered the originals of every document, tucked them in a folder, and placed them by the door. Because I knew what came next. He wouldn't take this quietly. People like Mark don't know how to walk away from something they feel entitled to. But I was ready. He had tried to take everything I built, and failed. What came next would be public. And I would no longer be silent. It was supposed to be a quiet retirement dinner. Just a few neighbors, some old friends from the factory, and Helen, who insisted on baking one of Marjorie's favorite lemon cakes for good luck. Nothing fancy. Just warmth, stories, and the kind of evening where no one's watching the clock. But then I saw Mark and Lydia walk through the door. Helen, bless her, had invited them, thinking maybe this could patch things up. She didn't know. No one did. Not yet. Mark came in wearing a blazer, too polished for the occasion. Lydia clutched her phone like she was late for a meeting. They smiled, wide, false, like they were still performing for an audience that no longer clapped. "Dad," Mark said, reaching for a hug. "You didn't think we'd miss this, did you?" I pulled back. "I didn't expect to see you here at all." There were murmurs from the room, a few sidelong glances, forks pausing mid-air. I took a breath and looked at Helen. "Can I say a few words?" She smiled. "Of course, Frank. It's your night." I stood near the fireplace, where Marjorie's photo still sat in its carved wooden frame. My hand trembled slightly as I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the folded papers. I hadn't planned to do this publicly. But they left me no choice. "I want to thank you all for being here," I began, voice steady. "It means more than you know. Most of you know I retired from the plant after 40 years. What you don't know is that in the last year, I've been fighting a battle I never thought I'd face." I looked toward Mark. He shifted uncomfortably but kept his smile. "This house, this old place full of creaks and chipped paint, it's been my home for over half a century. I built it with my wife. Raised my son here. Buried her and kept going. But recently, I learned that the people closest to me weren't waiting to celebrate my life. They were waiting to claim it." Lydia scoffed lightly. "Is this really the time, Frank? I ignored her. My son and his wife attempted to declare me mentally unfit. Drafted paperwork to take over my property, my accounts, even tried to sneak ownership under the guise of planning for the future. Gasps rippled across the room. People turned to Mark, whose face was rapidly draining of color. I changed my will, I continued. Removed them both. Added a clause, if they try to fight it, they get nothing. And this house? I held up a second document. This house now belongs to a trust that will become a home for veterans like me. Mark stepped forward, red-faced. Dad, don't do this here. No, I cut him off. You don't get to stop me anymore. You had your chance to speak, in private, in court, behind my back. Now I speak in the open. The room was silent. Lydia looked around, then back at Mark. Are you seriously just going to stand there? Mark's voice broke. Dad, we didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did, I said softly. You meant every word, every document, every lawyer's call. You saw this house as your next step, not my legacy. You wanted me gone. Just not dead yet. No one moved. Even the air in the room seemed to freeze. Helen finally spoke. Is it true? Mark opened his mouth, but no words came. I stepped forward, laying the documents on the coffee table for anyone to read. I don't want sympathy. I want peace. I've spent my life giving. Now I take back what's mine, not out of revenge, but out of dignity. Mark looked at me one last time. And in his eyes, for the first time, I saw something close to shame. They left without another word. The front door closed quietly, but the weight of it echoed through the room. I turned back to my guests. A few clapped. Others simply nodded, somber, respectful. Helen came and placed her hand on my shoulder. You did what had to be done, she said. I nodded, suddenly exhausted. But free. The cake was cut. The candles blown out. The stories continued, lighter now, easier. But I noticed something in the room had changed. People looked at me not just as the man retiring, but as the man who stood up for himself when it counted. Later that night, I sat on the porch with a cup of lukewarm coffee and watched the stars. For the first time in a long time, the house felt quiet, not empty, not haunted, just, mine again. There was still more to do. Papers to file. A future to build. But the fight? The fight was done. And I hadn't lost. Brain, do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The days that followed were quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful at first, just hollow. Like something had been ripped out of the walls and left a draft behind. I didn't hear from Mark or Lydia. No calls, no messages. Not even one of those passive-aggressive texts he used to send, "Hope you're feeling better, Dad." Nothing. Just silence. At first, I thought maybe they were gearing up for a counterattack. Maybe some new legal stunt. But Dana assured me everything was airtight. If they challenge it, they'll lose everything. I've seen families back off over far less. I wanted to believe that meant the storm had passed. But silence has a way of echoing louder than shouting. I still sat by the phone every evening, just in case. I'd stare at it between bites of dinner, waiting for it to light up, even though I'd convinced myself I didn't care anymore. But I did care. You don't spend 40 years raising someone, only to switch off the love like a lamp. The ache doesn't leave just because the house is safe. On the third morning, I went into town. Same old routine, picked up milk, dropped off mail, stopped by the hardware store to replace a broken rake handle. People stared at me longer than usual. Not unkindly, just long enough for it to feel like I'd become someone. At the post office, Mr. Duval, who'd been in line behind me, clapped a hand on my shoulder. Heard about the dinner, he said. Tough thing you did. I nodded, unsure of what to say. You were right, he added. More of us should do what you did. By the time I got home, 3 more neighbors had stopped me with similar words, quiet support from folks I never expected it from. One even left a lemon pie on my porch with a note that simply read, "For your courage." Funny. I'd lived in this town for nearly 50 years, and only now did people seem to see me. That night, I walked out to the edge of my yard, near the old oak tree Mark used to climb as a kid. The bark had grown over the carvings we made, our initials, crude and crooked, but still faintly there. I ran my fingers across the wood and whispered, "You don't get this." The moonlight stretched over the grass, and for the first time, I felt something new settle into my bones. Not pride. Not sorrow. Peace. The next few days fell into a rhythm. I fixed the hinge on the front gate, cleared out the shed, even revarnished the porch swing. Small things, but grounding. Work had always been my answer to everything. If my hands were busy, my mind stayed quiet. One afternoon, I was sitting on that porch swing when I heard a car pull up. My stomach tensed, expecting it to be Mark. But it wasn't. It was Daniel, the son of my old army buddy, Earl. I hadn't seen him in years, not since his dad's funeral. He stepped out of the car with that same wide stance his father used to walk with. "Mr. Franklin?" he asked. "That's me," I said, standing slowly. He smiled and held out a hand. Dad used to talk about this place all the time. Said it was the only porch he ever felt at home on. I gestured to the swing. "Still swings, barely. Sit down." We talked for an hour, about Earl, about his time overseas, about the nonprofit he worked with now helping older vets transition after housing loss or family estrangement. As he spoke, something stirred in me. A small flicker of purpose. Before he left, he handed me a card. "If you ever want to do something with this place, make it useful again, give me a call." I stared at the card long after he drove away. That night, I opened the window in Marjorie's old sewing room, the one that hadn't been touched in years. Dust coated everything like a second skin. Her embroidery thread still hung in color-coded rows, her patterns tucked in neat folders. I sat in her chair and just listened to the house breathe. Then I looked at the card again. Make it useful again. That phrase stuck with me. Maybe it wasn't enough to just keep the house out of Mark's hands. Maybe it was time to give it back, not to him, but to people who'd treat it like a home, not a prize. The next morning, I started clearing the room. One drawer at a time. A few hours later, Helen showed up with some muffins and caught me in the middle of stacking old fabrics. "You finally cleaning this place out?" she asked. "Thinking about turning it into something," I replied. "A place for men like Earl. A second chance for folks who need one." She didn't say anything at first. Just smiled and started helping. We worked quietly, side by side, and for the first time in a long time, the silence in the house felt different. Not empty. But full. The next morning, I woke up with a soreness in my back and dust in my lungs, but something in my chest felt lighter, like a locked door had finally opened. That sewing room had sat untouched for almost 20 years, holding on to memories like clutter. Now, with every folded curtain and boxed spool of thread, I felt like I was making room for something more than just space. Purpose. Daniel's card sat on the kitchen table. I'd read it 5 times already, the ink worn where my thumb kept brushing over the phone number. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, only that I wasn't willing to spend the rest of my days guarding the house like a dragon sitting on a pile of old dreams. If this place was going to mean something, really mean something, it had to live again. So I called him. "Frank," he said, answering on the first ring. "Didn't expect to hear from you this quick." "I don't waste time when I've made up my mind," I replied. He chuckled. "Then let's talk." We met at the house that Friday. He brought coffee and blueprints, and a notebook filled with scribbled notes from the nonprofit's last few projects. Veterans. Widowers. Men kicked out by families or forgotten by the system. People like me, just a few years down a different road. This could be more than just a transitional place, Daniel explained. It could be a community. Shared rooms, meals, weekend repair classes, maybe even therapy if we get the right volunteers. I looked around at the house as he spoke. The creaky floorboards, the cracked window panes. The fireplace that hadn't seen a real flame in 10 years. It's not much, I said. It's enough, he replied. It just needs a little love. I almost laughed. That's what Marjorie used to say when the porch roof would leak or the kitchen faucet squealed. It just needs a little love, Frank. Everything does. We got to work. I started by clearing out the garage, turned it into a makeshift storage unit for donations. Neighbors came by with spare beds, a couch, even a fridge someone had stored in their barn. Helen dropped off blankets she'd crocheted, each one folded with care. By the end of the second week, the house was starting to hum again. Not with noise, with life. I hadn't felt that kind of movement in years. We painted the old guest rooms, patched drywall, scrubbed windows until the sun poured in like it had been waiting. Daniel brought 2 of his volunteers, both retired Navy, and we worked side by side in comfortable silence, trading stories between coats of paint. One afternoon, I stood in the hallway, hammer in hand, staring at the pantry door. The one with Mark's height marks carved in every 6 months, uneven lines, little dates scribbled in fading ink. I ran my fingers over them, once, twice, then reached for a fresh coat of paint. But I couldn't do it. Not yet. Some marks are meant to stay, not as tributes to the person who left them, but to the man who carried them. Instead, I nailed a photo above it, me and Marjorie on the porch swing, her laughing, eyes closed, hand on my shoulder. It looked like home. Daniel saw me later that day, standing in front of the photo. She would have liked this, I said. He nodded. You're building something she'd be proud of. For the first time in months, I believed it. By the end of the month, we had 4 beds set up, a working kitchen, and plans to open the doors officially in 6 weeks. The Veterans Trust would cover most of the operating costs, and the rest would be managed through grants and small donations. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted it to mean something. To matter. Late one night, after the last volunteer left, I sat on the back porch with a mug of black coffee and stared out over the yard. The oak tree rustled gently, the same one that had watched Mark grow up, the same one that had shaded Marjorie's garden. And I thought, this is what a home is supposed to feel like. Not just walls and windows. But purpose. People were noticing, too. Helen had started calling the place Marjorie's house, a name that stuck. Even the town council sent someone out to tour the property, whispering about maybe listing it on a local heritage project. For once, people weren't talking about what I'd lost. They were talking about what we were building. And that made all the difference. I wasn't just guarding the past anymore. I was shaping the future. The first man who moved into Marjorie's house was named Alvin. 68 years old, Army veteran, and quiet as stone. He carried his whole life in a duffel bag that looked older than he did. Daniel brought him over one afternoon with a short introduction. Alvin doesn't say much. But he listens real well. I helped him carry his bag up to the front bedroom, the one with the view of the oak tree and the garden Marjorie once loved. He nodded in approval, gave a single thanks, and shut the door behind him. No fanfare. No story. That night, I left a thermos of black coffee on the table in the kitchen, figured maybe he'd come down in the morning, maybe he wouldn't. He did. Didn't say much, but he sat across from me. We drank in silence. And somehow, it was the most comfortable breakfast I'd had in years. A week later, we had two more. Nate and Hector, both former Marines, both recently evicted by children they once supported. It was like hearing my own story told back to me, with new names and different wounds. I sat with them during dinner, listened to their jokes, their silences, their laughter. Nate fixed the loose stair tread without anyone asking. Hector took to watering Marjorie's roses like it was second nature. Alvin started helping in the kitchen, slicing potatoes with the kind of precision only years of military mess hall experience can teach. They didn't call me Frank. They called me, sir. Not out of distance, but out of respect. Funny how that works. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you notice when it finally returns. One evening, we sat on the porch, me, Daniel, and the three of them, eating fried chicken Helen had brought over. The air smelled like summer and wood smoke. The kind of night you don't want to end. You ever miss the quiet? Nate asked me. I thought for a second, then shook my head. The wrong kind of quiet can kill a man. This is the good kind. He nodded, satisfied. People started calling more. The town paper ran a piece on the project, Widower Turns Home into Refuge for Veterans. I didn't care for the title, but the message felt right. I got letters from other towns, a couple calls from folks asking if we were accepting more residents. Daniel managed all that. I focused on fixing the leaky sink in the back room and making sure the coffee was strong enough to wake even Alvin. Then one morning, as I was trimming the hedges, I saw a figure standing at the end of the driveway. It was my granddaughter. Ella. She was 16 the last time I saw her, braces, earbuds always in, rolling her eyes at everything her parents said. Now she was taller, more grounded. Her hair pulled back in a braid like Marjorie used to wear when working in the garden. I walked down slowly, unsure if I should speak first. She beat me to it. Grandma would have loved this, she said. I smiled. She would have. Ella looked toward the porch, where Hector sat polishing an old radio. Dad told me what happened, she said. His version, anyway. I waited. He said you turned your back on him. And what do you think? She looked me square in the eyes, eyes that looked so much like her father's once did. I think he turned his back on you first. That hit harder than I expected. I nodded toward the house. Want a tour? She smiled. I'd love one. We walked room to room, and I told her stories she never knew, about the scratch in the floor from Mark's first bike, about the time Marjorie accidentally painted one wall in the living room bright orange instead of sunset coral, about the Christmas where the tree fell over twice and we still kept it leaning against the wall. She listened. Really listened. No phone. No rush. And when we reached the pantry, I showed her the height marks. That was your dad, I said, pointing. He used to beg me to measure him every few weeks, just to see if he grew. She stared at the lines, silent. After a moment, she turned to me. Can I come back? My throat tightened. Anytime you want. She came back the next weekend. Brought muffins she baked herself, blueberry. I lied and told her they were the best I'd ever had. She helped Nate clean the back patio, asked Hector about his time in service, even got Alvin to smile. That night, I found her sitting in Marjorie's chair, curled up with an old photo album. You know, she said, flipping the page, I think this place feels more like family than anywhere else I've been lately. I sat beside her. Maybe because it's full of people who know what it means to lose something, I said. And still choose to care. She rested her head on my shoulder. You built something good, Grandpa. I didn't reply. I just closed my eyes and let that moment settle into my bones like sunlight after a long winter. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes, it's the ones who show up. Sometimes, it's the ones who stay. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon when I heard the knock. Not urgent. Not loud. Just, unsure. I was in the kitchen, peeling potatoes for dinner. Hector was planning to make his famous beef stew, when the sound stopped me cold. The men were out back, Ella was upstairs painting the spare room, and I knew immediately, this knock wasn't from anyone who belonged here. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, opened the door, and there he was. Mark. He looked older than I remembered, thinner, paler. He wore a suit, but not a good one. His tie was askew, eyes sunken. For a moment, I wondered if Lydia had left him. "Hi, Dad," he said softly. I didn't say anything. He looked past me into the house. I could see him taking it all in, the smell of stew, the sound of laughter drifting through an open window, the sight of furniture he no longer recognized. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without answering. He walked slowly, his footsteps stiff, like he was carrying more than just regret. He paused in the hallway, looking up at the photos lining the wall. One of him on his first birthday. One of me and Marjorie, sunburned and happy on our honeymoon. One of Ella, holding a puppy that had long since passed. "You kept these," he said. "I didn't do any of this for you, Mark." He turned. "I know." We stood there, neither of us sure how to cross the chasm between us. Finally, he spoke. "I heard from Ella," he said. "She's been coming here." "She's welcome," I said. "She's always been welcome." He nodded, slowly. "I didn't come to fight," he added. "Or to ask for anything. I just wanted to see the house. One last time." I crossed my arms. "Why now?" He hesitated. Looked down at the floor. "Because I know I'm not part of this anymore. I know I ruined it. Anne. I wanted to see what it became. I thought maybe I'd hate it. But I don't." He looked around the living room. The walls were freshly painted, the fireplace cleaned, the old bookshelf repaired and filled with new stories. "It feels alive," he whispered. "It is," I said. "It's been alive since you left." That cut him, I saw it in his eyes. But I didn't pull it back. I wasn't here to coddle him. He stepped toward the fireplace, where Marjorie's photo still sat. "I miss her," he said. I didn't answer. "I know I betrayed you," he continued. "I let Lydia talk me into things I knew were wrong. But the truth is, I was already thinking them. She just gave me permission." That was the most honest thing I'd heard him say in years. "I was scared," he added. "Scared of losing control. Scared of watching you get older. Scared of not having a plan. So I tried to make one. But all I really did was push you out of it." I let the silence stretch. I didn't want an apology. I wanted truth. He looked at me then, eyes glassy. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I'd forgive me. But I wanted you to know. I remember the good things. The fishing trips. The stories. The way you used to carry me to bed when I fell asleep in the car." I blinked hard. Those memories still lived in me, buried beneath years of disappointment. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded photo, one I hadn't seen in years. Me, him, and Marjorie, sitting in the backyard, eating watermelon in the sun. We were all laughing. "I found it last week. Thought you might want it." He handed it to me, and for a second, our fingers touched. There was nothing warm in it. Just recognition. "Thank you," I said quietly. He looked around once more, then back at me. "Is this goodbye?" I nodded. "It is." He didn't argue. Just nodded back. He turned and walked to the door. Before he stepped out, he stopped, hand on the knob. "Do you think I'll ever earn your respect again?" I thought long and hard before answering. "No," I said. But maybe you'll find someone else's. He stood there for another breath, then walked out and closed the door behind him. I stared at that door for a long time. Then I turned around and walked back into the kitchen. Ella stood there, holding a bowl of peeled carrots. "Was that him?" she asked. "Yeah." She looked down. "Did he apologize?" "No," I said. "But I think he tried." She handed me the bowl, then reached out and hugged me, not hard, not long. "Just enough. You don't have to carry it anymore," she said. And I realized something in that moment. She was right. I didn't need closure from Mark. I'd already found it in the people who stayed, in the lives being rebuilt under my roof, in the laughter that filled these old walls again. Speech balloon, would you forgive him? Or is respect something you can't reclaim once lost? Let us know below. The sign went up just after sunrise. Simple wood, hand-painted by Ella herself. Hung with brass hooks above the porch railing, where Marjorie used to hang her flower baskets. The paint was still a little wet, and the breeze carried the scent of it, fresh, earthy, hopeful. Marjorie's house. I stood back and looked at it, the name glowing faintly in the morning light. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. Like after all this time, the house had found its purpose. Like I had. The ribbon cutting was small, nothing official, nothing with cameras or politicians. Just neighbors, volunteers, a few of the folks from the Veterans Trust, and, of course, the men who now called this place home. Ella made lemonade. Helen brought her lemon cake again. Daniel set up folding chairs on the lawn, and Alvin, of all people, gave a short speech. "I've lived in cars, motels, barracks, and basements," he said, voice rough but steady. "But this is the first place in a long time where I wake up and remember who I used to be." That line stayed with me. We cut the ribbon with my old hunting knife, the same one I used to cut the rope for the tire swing Mark used when he was 7. Full circle. Afterward, the guests filtered through the house, walking room to room, admiring the framed photos, the refurbished kitchen, the sunlit reading corner in the living room. Someone asked about the old marks on the pantry door. I just said, "That's part of the history," and let them be. Ella played piano in the dining room, a soft, hesitant melody she'd taught herself by ear. Hector served stew. Nate fixed the back gate during the ceremony because he said it was bugging him. It didn't feel like a charity. It felt like a home. When the last guest left, and the sun had started to dip behind the hills, I sat on the porch alone, watching the light change. I thought of Marjorie. Of her laughter. Her stubborn streak. The way she used to fold towels 3 different ways before deciding on the one she liked. I whispered aloud, "You were always the heart of this place. Now it's full again. Not the way we planned, but maybe the way it was meant to be." I imagined her sitting in the old wicker chair beside me, smiling with that knowing look of hers. Not proud. Just, at peace. The wind moved gently through the trees, like a sigh. I looked out over the yard and saw Alvin showing Ella how to prune a rose bush. Hector was patching the chicken wire fence. Nate was halfway up a ladder replacing a bulb I hadn't even realized was out. They didn't owe me anything. But they were here. They chose to be here. And that meant everything. Inside the house, the walls no longer echoed. They responded. With laughter, conversation, the shuffle of boots, the clink of dishes. With life. Later that evening, I walked room to room as the others turned in for the night. I checked the locks, turned off the lights, adjusted the crooked photo frame in the hallway. In the kitchen, I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat at the table, and looked at the space across from me, where Mark used to sit when he was little, swinging his legs, asking questions about the stars. I didn't feel anger anymore. Just distance. I still hoped he'd find peace. But not here. Not in this house. That chapter was done. And I had no intention of reopening it. Before heading to bed, I stopped in the pantry. Ran my hand over the old markings one more time. Then, for the first time in years, I added a new line. Not for Mark. For me. Fr, age 75. August. A quiet statement that I was still here. Still growing, even now. As I lay in bed, I could hear soft footsteps upstairs, the hum of a fan, a door creaking closed. The sounds of a living house. A loved house. Marjorie's house. Mine. Ours. And for the first time in a long time, I fell asleep not guarding what I had, but grateful for what I had built.